The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, each drop a staccato beat that echoed through the marble halls. Kim Yi-sung stood with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the Seoul skyline blur into watercolor streaks of neon and shadow. At 42, he had built an empire that existed in the spaces between legality and lawlessness, a kingdom of whispers, debts, and carefully orchestrated fear. Tonight, however, his mind was elsewhere. "Mr. Kim, your dinner is ready." The voice was soft, accented with the melodic lilt of East Africa, each syllable carefully pronounced in Korean. He turned to find Amara standing in the doorway, her dark skin luminous against the white of her simple uniform. She'd been in his household for 8 months now, arriving through channels he preferred not to examine too closely, a favor owed, a debt called in. She was supposed to be invisible, as all good house staff were. Yet increasingly, Yi-sung found himself noticing the grace with which she moved, the intelligence that flickered in her eyes when she thought no one was watching. "Thank you, Amara," he said, his voice betraying nothing of his thoughts. "Join me." Her eyes widened slightly. "Sir." "I said join me. I'm tired of eating alone." It was a breach of protocol, one that would raise eyebrows among his men if they knew. But Yi-sung had learned long ago that absolute power meant the freedom to break your own rules. Amara hesitated, then nodded, moving with practiced efficiency to set a second place at the long dining table. As she worked, Yi-sung studied her, the curve of her neck, the way her fingers trembled ever so slightly as she arranged the silverware. Fear or something else. They ate in silence for several minutes, the only sounds the clink of chopsticks against porcelain and the relentless rain outside. Finally, Yi-sung spoke. "Tell me about your home. Uganda, wasn't it?" Amara looked up, surprise flickering across her features. You remember." "I remember everything." It wasn't a boast, simply fact. In his world, forgotten details meant death. She set down her chopsticks carefully. "Kampala. I grew up in Kampala, the city where the 7 hills meet Lake Victoria." Her voice softened with memory. "Very different from Seoul, warmer, louder in a different way." "You miss it." "Every day." The admission seemed to slip out before she could stop it. She looked down quickly, as if expecting punishment for such honesty. Instead, Yi-sung poured her a glass of wine, a burgundy that cost more than most people earned in a month. "And yet you're here, working for a man like me." "We all make choices based on the options we have," Amara said quietly, accepting the glass. "My family needed money, my sister's medical bills." She trailed off, taking a sip of wine. Yi-sung nodded. He understood necessity. His own path to power had been paved with impossible choices. "Do you know what I do, Amara? Truly." She met his gaze then, and he saw something he hadn't expected, not innocence, but a weary knowledge. "I'm not blind, Mr. Kim. I see the men who come here at odd hours. I hear things, even when I'm not supposed to. You're dangerous." "Does that frighten you?" "Yes," she paused. "But so did leaving my family. So did getting on a plane to a country where I didn't speak the language, where I knew no one. I've learned to live with fear." There was steel beneath her soft-spoken manner, a resilience that intrigued him. Yi-sung had surrounded himself with hard men for so long he'd forgotten what quiet strength looked like. The evening unfolded in unexpected conversation. They spoke of books. She loved African literature, writers he'd never heard of. She asked about Korean history, and he found himself explaining the complexities of his country's past with a patience he didn't know he possessed. The wine bottle emptied. The rain continued. At some point, Yi-sung stood and walked to the windows. Amara followed, standing beside him to watch the storm. "Beautiful," she murmured. "Destructive," he countered. "Both can be true." He turned to look at her then, really look at her, and found her already watching him. The air between them shifted, charged with something unspoken. Slowly, giving her every chance to step away, he reached out and touched her cheek. She didn't flinch. "This is a mistake," he said, though he didn't drop his hand. "Many things are." Her voice was barely a whisper. The kiss, when it came, tasted of wine and recklessness. Yi-sung pulled her close, feeling her heart hammering against his chest, whether from fear or desire he couldn't tell. Perhaps both. Perhaps it didn't matter. They moved together through the penthouse, a tangle of shed clothing and whispered words in 2 languages. In his bedroom, with its view of the glittering city, Yi-sung discovered that Amara's skin was warm as summer, that she gasped his name like a prayer or a curse. For the first time in years, he felt something other than the cold calculation that had defined his existence. Hours later, they lay tangled in silk sheets, their breathing slowly returning to normal. The rain had stopped, leaving the city washed clean and gleaming. Amara traced patterns on his chest, her touch feather-light. "What happens now?" she asked. It was the question Yi-sung had been avoiding. In his world, there were no fairy tales. Men like him didn't get happy endings. "I don't know," he admitted. "This complicates things." "Everything about you is complicated," Yi-sung. It was the first time she'd used his given name, and the intimacy of it sent a jolt through him. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed on the nightstand, a particular pattern of vibrations that meant only one thing: emergency. He grabbed it, reading the message with growing tension. "I have to go," he said, already moving toward his closet. Amara sat up, pulling the sheet around herself. "What's wrong?" "Business, the kind that can't wait." He dressed quickly, efficiently, the tender lover transforming back into the mafia boss with practiced ease. But when he turned to leave, he paused at the doorway. "Amara, stay here. Don't leave this room until I return." Something in his voice must have frightened her, because she nodded without question. As Yi-sung took the private elevator down to the parking garage where his men waited, his mind raced. The message had been brief but clear. One of his warehouses had been hit, millions in merchandise stolen or destroyed. Worse, 3 of his men were dead. Someone was making a move against him. The warehouse was still smoking when Yi-sung arrived, accompanied by his lieutenant, Park Min-ho, and a contingent of armed men. Police lights strobed blue and red against the darkness, but the officers kept their distance. They knew whose territory this was, and they knew better than to ask questions they didn't want answered. 3 dead, Min-ho reported, his face grim. "Kim Sang-woo, Lee Ti-hyun, and—" he hesitated, "and your cousin Yi-hyun." Yi-sung's expression didn't change, but inside, something cold and sharp twisted. Yi-hyun had been 24, eager, loyal. Stupid, perhaps, to have been caught in this trap, but loyal nonetheless. "Who?" The question came out quiet, deadly. "We're still investigating, but—" Min-ho pulled out his phone, showing Yi-sung grainy security footage. "Look at this." The video showed masked figures moving with military precision, taking out his guards with alarming efficiency. But it was the final frame that made Yi-sung's blood freeze. One of the attackers turning toward the camera, mask slipping just enough to reveal dark skin, distinctively African features. "There's more," Min-ho said carefully. "We found this in the wreckage." He held up a scorched piece of fabric, unmistakably the same material as the uniforms worn by household staff, the same uniform Amara wore. The drive back to the penthouse was silent, Yi-sung's mind working through possibilities, connections, probabilities. It couldn't be coincidence. 8 months ago, Amara had entered his household. 8 months of slowly earning his trust, his attention. And now this. He thought of her hands on his skin, her whispered words, the vulnerability in her eyes. Had it all been an act? Was he really so foolish? The penthouse was dark when he returned, save for a single lamp in the living room. Amara sat curled in an armchair, still wearing his shirt, a book open on her lap. She looked up as he entered, her expression brightening before she registered something in his face. "Yi-sung, what happened?" He crossed the room in 3 strides, grabbing her wrist and pulling her to her feet. "Who are you really?" Fear flashed in her eyes, genuine fear or another performance. "What are you talking about? You're hurting me." 3 of my men are dead, my warehouse is destroyed, and evidence points to your people." He released her wrist but blocked her path. "So I'll ask again, who are you?" Amara's face cycled through emotions, confusion, realization, then something that looked almost like resignation. She sat back down slowly, her hands trembling. "I'm exactly who I said I am," she said quietly. "A woman from Kampala who needed money for her family, but—" She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "But you're right that I'm not the only one." "Explain, now." "My sister, the one with medical bills, she's real. The debt is real. But the men who helped me get this job, who arranged everything, they told me they were philanthropists, helping African workers find employment abroad." Her voice broke. "I was so desperate, I didn't ask questions I should have asked. And tonight, I swear to you, I know nothing about any attack. Please, Jae-sung, you have to believe me." She stood, moving toward him with her hands raised as if approaching a wild animal. "Whatever is happening, I'm not part of it. I would never." His phone buzzed. Another message, this time with an attachment. He opened it, and his blood turned to ice. The photo showed Amara's sister. He recognized her from a framed picture Amara kept in her small room. The woman was bound to a chair, terror evident in her wide eyes. The message beneath was in English. "We have what you love. You have what we need. Dawn brings exchange. Alone, or she dies." Jae-sung looked up at Amara, who had gone pale. "They have my sister. Oh God, no, no, no." "This was their plan all along," Jae-sung said, his mind clicking through the strategy with cold clarity. "Get someone close to me. Use her as leverage. The attack tonight was just to prove they're serious." "Who?" Amara demanded, anger breaking through her fear. "Who would do this?" "Someone who knows how I think, someone who knows that I've become." He stopped, the admission difficult even now. "Someone who knows I've become attached to you." The implication hung between them, that his enemies had been watching long enough to see what even he had tried to deny. "There's more you're not telling me," Amara said, studying his face. "I see it in your eyes. What is it?" Jae-sung made a decision then, one that went against every instinct for self-preservation he'd honed over decades. "The organization that brought you here, did they call themselves the East African Relief Network?" She nodded slowly. "They're not philanthropists. They're traffickers working for a rival syndicate, Ugandan and Kenyan operators who have been trying to break into the Korean market for years." He showed her the photo again. "This is Ibrahim Almondi's signature move. He specializes in using families as leverage." "You know him?" "We've crossed paths. 2 years ago, I prevented his organization from establishing a foothold in Seoul. He lost face, money, and men. He's been waiting for an opportunity to strike back." Amara sank back into the chair, her whole body shaking. "So I was just a pawn. A tool to hurt you and my sister was insurance to keep me compliant." "It appears so." "And now," she looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes, "what happens to us now?" It was the same question she'd asked hours earlier, in the warm aftermath of their lovemaking. But the context had shifted entirely. Jae-sung knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "Now we do something neither of them expects. We work together." "How?" "They want an exchange. They want me vulnerable. They want me to show up alone, probably planning to kill us both and take whatever leverage they think I'm bringing." He squeezed her hands. "But I didn't survive this long by doing what my enemies expect." Over the next few hours, Jae-sung explained his plan. It was risky, requiring precise timing and a level of trust that neither of them had reason to give. But it was also the only chance they had. As dawn approached, painting the Seoul skyline in shades of gold and rose, Amara stood at the penthouse window where they'd shared their first kiss. She was dressed now in dark, practical clothing that Jae-sung had provided. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "Good, fear keeps you sharp." He came to stand beside her, handing her a small device that looked like a button. "But remember, you're not alone in this." She turned to him then, her dark eyes searching his face. "Why are you doing this? You could just eliminate the threat, cut your losses. I'm nobody to you." Jae-sung thought about that, about the cold calculation that had guided every decision he'd made for 20 years. About the moment that calculation had failed him, when he'd invited a housekeeper to dinner simply because he was tired of being alone. "You're wrong," he said simply. "You're not nobody." The location for the exchange was an abandoned factory in Incheon, far from the city center. As Jae-sung's car approached with the rising sun behind them, he could see figures moving in the shadows, Amandi's men, positioned and waiting. Amara sat rigid beside him in the backseat, her finger hovering near the button he'd given her. "Whatever happens," Jae-sung said, "trust the plan, trust me." She nodded, unable to speak. The car stopped. The door opened. And as Jae-sung stepped out into the cold morning air with Amara at his side, he saw Ibrahim Amandi emerge from the factory, a smile on his face and a gun in his hand. Behind him, bound and bloodied but alive, was Amara's sister. "Kim Jae-sung," Amandi called out in accented Korean. "At last we meet properly. Shall we discuss terms?" But as Jae-sung walked forward, he caught the reflection of morning light on metal from the rooftops surrounding them, his own snipers, positioned exactly as planned. Min-ho and his best men, waiting for the signal. The game had only just begun, and for the first time in his life, Jae-sung was playing for something more valuable than power. He was playing for a chance at redemption.